Embark on a journey of discovery into the heart of North American family stories. Welcome to the How We Got Here podcast, where family historian Brian Nash connects with guests to explore the often untold and always fascinating histories of their ancestors. Prepare to be moved, surprised, and deeply connected by these personal accounts. And remember, every family has a story to tell, and every story is worth exploring. In this episode, Brian welcomes Craig Morrissey, a genealogist and the owner of More UC Genealogy in Newfoundland, to the show. Morrissey, who is also on the board of the Family History Society of Newfoundland and Labrador, and works part-time at the Provincial Archives at the Rooms in St. John's, shares how his passion for Newfoundland history led him to a career in genealogy. The discussion explores the best starting points for anyone researching their Newfoundland roots, emphasizing the value of personal family information, online resources like Family Search and Ancestry, and the wealth of untapped records available in person at the Rooms. Morrissey explains that the Room's unique name is derived from the fishing sheds, or fishing rooms, historically used by fishermen, tying the facility directly to the island's strong cultural heritage in the fishery. The conversation then delves into the history of European settlement in Newfoundland, confirming that the early population was primarily driven by the cod fishery. Morrissey details that the main European ancestral groups came from the southeast of Ireland, like County Waterford, the southwest corner of England, Devon and Cornwall, the Channel Islands, and France. The pair discussed the transition from seasonal fishing visits to permanent settlement, which began in the late 1600s, and the key early records available, such as colonial office records and merchant records, which are crucial for research before widespread church records or civil registration, which didn't begin until 1891 to 92. They also cover the unique history of government changes, the availability of military records, especially for the Royal Newfoundland Regiment in World War I, and the development of other industries like lumber and mining, which brought economic change and led many fishermen to new work. Finally, the episode highlights the significant history of outmigration to the Boston States and other parts of the US and Canada, noting the large communities of Newfoundlanders that formed in places like Boston and Brooklyn. Morrissey offers practical advice on using resources like the border crossing documentation on Family Search and the Memorial University of Newfoundland's Digital Archives Initiative for finding these connections. He stresses the importance of methodical, patient research, using physical charts to avoid contradictions, and not being discouraged by gaps in records. Craig concludes by revealing his holy grail of missing Newfoundland records, the almost entirely lost 1911 census, and the Catholic records for Harbour Grace that were destroyed in an 1866 fire. So sit back and grab your favourite beverage, perhaps some Newfoundland screech, unless of course you're listening to this while you're driving. Then you'd better stick to coffee.
Good day. Welcome back to How We Got Here Genealogy. I'm Brian Nash, your host, and today I have Craig Morrissey from Newfoundland. He's a genealogist there. He owns a company called the More You See Genealogy. And Craig, just to introduce yourself to our listeners and just let me know, them and myself, know a little bit about yourself and how you got an interest in genealogy.
Sure. Well, ever since I was a little kid, I always had this avid interest in Newfoundland history and culture. I can remember being quite young, and I had one particular aunt who always gave me books about Newfoundland, and I still have those books. I'm a bit of a book hoarder when it comes to anything Newfoundland history. And fast forward a bit to around 1998, there was an 10-week evening course on family tree research at the Memorial University of Newfoundland. And my brother Pat reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in going with him. It was 10 nights. It was 10 weeks, one night a week for about 2 hours. And it was like two great worlds colliding, given my interest in history. And right from the get-go, it was a lightning bolt, and it was taught by a wonderful lady who I'm still close friends with, Elsa Flack. Um, so from there, doing my own family tree research, um, word, of course, spreads quickly. You're doing that, and then people ask, would you mind looking at mine? And a few years back, about 4 years ago, I retired from another career. But during evening hours and weekends, I was doing genealogy research for folks, and I launched my business, More You See Genealogy, and it's been my life. Thankfully, it's my passion. In addition to my business, I'm on the board of the Family History Society of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I actually work part-time at the Provincial Archives at the Rooms in St. John's as well. So my whole life is basically Newfoundland history and connecting people to their Newfoundland roots.
Awesome. That's really I think how a lot of people they have an interest in history first, and then they then connect it with their when they start connecting their own family history, which is one of the reasons I really try to encourage people to get into genealogy or get into, I prefer to call being family history, because when you connect with that, you connect with history as a greater. It makes it much more personal.
Absolutely.
It gives you that interest in history, and too many people today, I don't think, know their own history as well as they should. And I think we're really lost when we lose that. So you took a 10-week course, and that's great to start doing the basics. But I know when you're in Newfoundland, because I have done a little bit of research on my own family from Newfoundland, there's some intricacies and differences that come with every different area where you're doing research.
Mhm.
What things, resources are the most valuable if a person has their roots in Newfoundland? Where's a good place for them to start?
Well, I think like any family tree research for anybody in the world, I always say the best tool you have is a mirror, and hold it up to yourself and to your family and start collecting the information you have. Um, and then from there, I always encourage people to start doing a little bit of research. Of course, if you're not in Newfoundland, you would have to do that online. And there's, some of the more popular websites out there like Family Search, which is incredibly valuable, as well. Things like places like Ancestry as well. The Family History Society, Newfoundland, Labrador have a ton of resources online. Uh, uh, and certainly, because I'm a big proponent of coming to Newfoundland and come to the island and get to the Rooms, the beautiful facility in St. John's that is a conglomeration of a museum, art gallery, and my second home, which is the actual provincial archives. And there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of records. Um, like everything, there's a lot of stuff digitized today, but it's the tip of the iceberg, really. What is there. So I would encourage people that if you're going to do research on your Newfoundland roots, you discover that some of your ancestors came through here, that try to plan a trip, or for that matter, if you can't plan a trip, do look into what genealogical researchers are in Newfoundland who may be able to assist you.
And that's, I think, often people that do genealogy, they tend to be a little that do it themselves. They tend not to rely on other professionals.
Yeah.
They seem that they assume that they can do it all. I know that's one of my weaknesses
Yeah.
sometimes. So the Rooms, first of all, where did the name the Rooms come from? Because it's just
Oh, that's a great question. It if you look up any pictures of the skyline of St. John's, you'll see this rather unique looking building that has about 3 peaks on it. And what the 3 peaks actually represent to the building is fishing rooms, or basically the sheds that allowed the fishermen had down by the water where they stored their gear. And so when they built the building, they really want to touch base into our cultural heritage with the strong connection, of course, with the fishery. And so that's basically what they call it, the rooms.
Okay. So people with Newfoundland ancestry, the original settlers of Newfoundland, the early settlers, aside from indigenous and those Vikings that came, but sort of didn't leave a trace, or not that of genetically, at least not that anybody can put a good proof to. Who were these people, the early settlers of Newfoundland?
Well, I mean, in terms of indigenous, I mean, you go to the Maritime Archaic folks, the Beothuk as well, and the Mi'kmaq, who still have a large population here. One of the things that I get a lot of requests from clients is to look at indigenous roots, if they have indigenous roots, and it can be a bit of a challenge, to be honest. The paper trail on that is quite rare, and what you're actually looking for when you're doing that type of research is that's particularly sometime in the 1800s, maybe in a marriage record, that besides somebody's name will be a designation that identifies them as indigenous. Now, however, it is extremely rare to find that, to be totally honest, and I say that not to discourage people, because, you know, basically, if you're going to be going down that route, it's no different than doing any type of family tree research anyway. But oral histories are really, really important, for sure, and DNA testing is a key piece for that as well.
So, but post-indigenous, I guess I was talking more about the European.
Okay.
Where did they come from? Because there's Newfoundland, you know, when we think about it, and when you hear people from Newfoundland, you definitely hear the Irishness in the accent, and Irish people will agree with that. But you have names like Porto Basque, which, you know, to me would indicate that there was Basque people possibly there originally, and so and I know with the fishing industry, that early fishing industry, it brought a lot of people there possibly from time to time. Who were the first, like the settlers when they first started to establish communities? What people groups would there be?
Well, one of the important things to know about Newfoundland is there was maybe one reason why it was settled, and that was codfish, the fishery. And it was probably the largest in the world at the time. So in terms of where people came from, primarily you look at the southeast of Ireland, so places like County Waterford, and that's where my Morrissey ancestors came from. The southwest of the corner of England in the Devon area and Cornwall, and as well the Channel Islands, and the French as well. The French did a significant fishery here. We still have people here who have French ancestry, but that's mainly where they come from. The important thing to remember as well is that at the start, it was a very seasonal fishery, that they would come in June, start their fishing, undoubtedly set up some fishing rooms and fishing flakes to dry their fish on shore, but come November, they would leave and go back. Eventually, at first, they were discouraged from settling, But then eventually that particularly the merchants from the Devon area said, we need people there to protect our fishing premises. And that's when things started really to take hold, to have permanent settlement here. So basically, it's a mixture of Irish, English, French, and Channel Islands.
And when this first, I guess, more permanent, like you said, not just summer residency, when did it start to occur?
Permanent residency. I mean, in late 1600s, there was Mr. Guy who came over with a settlement. It was the first really planned settlement in Cupid's in Newfoundland, which is outside of Harbour Grace area. Um, and some folks too would just not go back. They would just stay and head for the hills, I guess, and then eventually build their homes pretty close to shore.
And for those early records, what kind of early records do they have, like these first settlements? Um, is
Well,
it,
I mean, both here and at Kew, the archives in London has significant papers. I know here, and again, I referenced rooms, although there are other resources
yeah.
we'll probably talk about as well. One of my favorite sets to access when we get way back is the Colonial Office records, which is basically the correspondence between Newfoundland and Britain at the time, because we were considered a colony of Britain. And a lot of times that there was, um, some census records to capture who were in the coves. Mostly they would capture the men and how many people in their household, their religion, how many servants, et cetera, et cetera.
And would there be a lot of records back then from the merchants in regards to the fishermen? Would there be, is there a good, um,
Yeah. Yeah, there would be. Yeah, I mean, there are collections, for example, like Newman and Slade companies, who were major merchants here way back, where they sometimes it would just be an odd entry talking about a certain fisherman or whatnot. But it's well worth looking into those at the rooms, especially when you're going further back. Uh, and you're trying to establish who was in what location. So, for example, on the south coast of Newfoundland, um, uh, there weren't much religious establishment there. And in fact, one of the first sets of records was from the Archdeacon in St. Thomas's Church in Newfoundland, who traveled the South Coast in 1839. And he noted in his journal that it was the first time those people had ever seen a member of the clergy. So going before that, you do want to try to look at the Colonial Office records and the merchant records as well, to see if you can glean out of that some mention of who was in these little coves.
and yeah, I definitely, because I'm sure that would be people weren't as interested necessarily in record taking or they keeping prosperity in their day-to-day life. It was always business or government that would be had those records.
Yeah, I mean, for the individual person, your day-to-day was basic survival.
Yeah.
And so collecting your fish and selling it to a merchant or a merchant firm, and basic survival. I mean, it was a harsh environment, and fishermen, established their houses and their coves to be close to the fishing grounds. And that's why you look at old maps of Newfoundland, and I reference the South Coast as well, and nearly every little indentation is a cove. It's a place, and they just got set up somewhat haphazardly, i.e., it wasn't something that was established by a government to say you must live here. They would just look at a cove and say, I can put a house here, and I can bring my boat up, and I can put my fish flakes and I can row directly out to the fishing grounds.
And so with those people, they weren't established by government to be there. Or, is there a point when there's records as far as land ownership? Like, I know when you look at other places where a lot of the settlers, where they lived was very intentional. They were given land grants to um, to go to settle at a specific location. So you have those records. When can a person, if they're wanting to look into Newfoundland records, when can they start to see those type of records?
You can see some of those records in the mid to late 1700s and going into the 1800s as well, particularly those colonial office records I mentioned earlier, where they would look at they would go into an area and they would interview the people. And some of those records are pretty fascinating because some of the things they captured, one of the questions they asked is, how did you obtain the land or this property? And some would say, well, it was left to me in a will 20 years ago by my father. And so then you could just do your math and say, well, okay, well, we know this family was here just by virtue of that fact. But yeah, it's quite interesting to see those that documentation.
Okay. And with Newfoundland having a little different history than a lot of the rest of Canada as far as when you get into the 1800s and the 20th century,
Yeah.
and particularly in the early 20th century where there was and late 19th century where there was some changes in the type of government that Newfoundland had. Are the records consistent for those periods, or do you see?
Well, like everywhere, there are gaps, and when
Yeah.
particularly if you're doing genealogical research, you're looking for religious records, church records, because civil registration never came into effect until 1891, 92. So you're looking for the church records for various regions. Uh, what you have to keep in mind as well, and again, like the example I gave earlier about the South Coast not really having established churches there until much later on. If somebody lived in a small cove, and this applies to Labrador of our province as well, is that you may see in some of these records that 6 members of a family are being baptized on the same day, and the marriage is being solemnized because they simply didn't see clergy every year. They only see them so many years. So that's something to keep in mind. But the records are not too bad. I mean, I know at the Rooms Provincial Archives, we have, a lot of copies of the church records. By no means are they absolutely complete for a variety of reasons. Some because of that they were just simply lost or burned, in fires, etc. But it's really it's a unique thing to do research here. And again, as like you say, the change in government. I mean, first we were completely governed from Britain, and then we had a representative government where there was local legislation. Then we got responsible government where we were fully fledged and had our own legislature. And then moving forward into the 20th century, for the period 1934 to 1949, we actually gave up our democratic government, and we were run by a commission of government consisting of 3 Newfoundlanders and 3 representatives from the Crown. And then, of course, in 1949, we joined Canada.
Yeah. So records would be different. I mean, even military service, they obviously they didn't serve in the Canadian military during World War I necessarily, or World War II, but were they considered just part of the British Army, people that would have been enlisted at that point, and would their records be in England? Were they carried over to Canada?
Well, going back even a little further, is that when the British military were here in the early 1800s in the garrison, that there are military records there of listings of soldiers and court-martial reports, et cetera, et cetera. Moving forward to World War One, something that all Newfoundlanders are extremely proud of is that we had our own regiment. It was the Newfoundland Regiment, and later conferred the word Royal, the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, in World War One. Really pleased to say that all the members of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, their original service records are scanned, and they're available for you to access at home, to download or print from the Room's website, therooms.ca. And it's a treasure trove of information, just a treasure trove. As far as the World War II records, for the service records particularly, they would still be in the UK at the archives there. However, if a Newfoundlander for World War II decided to sign up with the Canadian Expeditionary Force, I would suggest that you contact the Department of Veteran Affairs in Ottawa for those.
So there would be a good mix of those, and
yeah, it would be. And you know, again, the World War One records, particularly, I have an affinity for. I'm not sure how many people realize, but on July 1st here in Newfoundland, we actually have a bit of a split day. In the morning, it's Memorial Day to commemorate the disaster of July 1st, 1916, at the Battle of the Somme, and more commonly known as for the Newfoundland Regiment, the Battle of Beaumont-Hamel, where over 800 guys went over the top that day, and only 68 made roll call the next morning. And in the afternoon on July 1st, we celebrate Canada Day. So it's quite unique here. And last year, really proud, we repatriated the remains of an unknown soldier to our National War Memorial in downtown St. John's. And it's a National War Memorial because, again, it was built before we joined Canada.
Well, yeah, exactly. I guess it's awesome that you have all those records there and they're available online, because often military records are they're great because military they kept good records because especially when you go back. Talking about military records, you brought up a little bit about the 1800s and that, and when the British were there, their military is there. I know in places in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PI, when I've done research, you have the people from those times that did serve as soldiers locally wind up staying there for whatever reason. Was that a way of some of the early non-fishing population, I guess, that would have been settled in Newfoundland? Were there soldiers that would have been stationed in Newfoundland, and were they given any type of grants by the British government to stay there, or things to encourage them to stay there?
Some, not many. I mean, mostly, you're rewarded land if you were high ranking or you served overseas and you were looking to populate Newfoundland. For the most part, and there are tons of records in both the Roman Catholic and the Church of England records for St. John's, where you see members of the garrison marrying local ladies, even though it was discouraged at one point. But when they got reassigned, they had to go. So, for example, when the garrison pulled out around the mid-late 1800s, some of them went to Nova Scotia. And so you may see that they had relocated there. But yeah, and you didn't see many locals who signed up. But mostly these were people that, I mean, most of the garrison folks actually started in Halifax and then were reassigned over here. And in response, basically, to invasions by other countries. France particularly was involved, and they realized that we had to station people here. The old feeling was prior to that was, well, like what's to protect? At the time we were an icebound island, so nobody can get near us. But what they didn't account was for attacks overland.
And when when you have that, that was basically, like you said, an icebound island, besides the fishermen, what and the soldiers that would have been there to protect it, what other type of people would you start to see in the garrisons? What industries? I know for a long time the forestry industry in Newfoundland was quite prominent. Do you start seeing um, those at one certain point? Is there something that sparked that boom or anything that you might?
Yeah, well, to begin with, I mean, a lot of the other occupations would be associated with the fishery. So blacksmiths, coopers are making barrels and whatnot. Um, there'd be a servant class too. Many households did have at least one servant. Um, it was just the style at the time. Then you get the merchant class as well, who's supplying the fishery and buying the fish. Um, uh, Farming on the East Coast Newfoundland was done. The variety of what could be grown is affected by the acidity of our soil, so we had a lot of root vegetables. In terms of the lumber industry, well, first of all, a lot of people, a lot of fishermen went into the woods to cut wood for themselves. And with the railway that was built in the late 1800s to open up the interior, you saw at least a couple lumber mills. I think of a couple, particularly in Grand Falls in central Newfoundland and Corner Brook on the west coast. They got established, which had an interesting effect. And I was mentioning this to somebody the other day, actually. It had an interesting effect in that it impacted the fishery, in that a lot of fishermen decided that, you know what, I mean, I can go and work in a mill. It's hard work, really hard work, from 9 to 5 and actually get cash. And so they left the fishery and they moved to places like Corner Brook, and they moved to places like Grand Falls or other regions that had those types of industry. What people need to understand as well in terms of Newfoundland history is that the fishery for a long time was based on what was called a truck system. There was no money exchanged hands. A fisherman would agree to sell his catch to a merchant in a community, and that would be exchanged for his equipment and goods he needed for the fishery, and as well his food, etc., for his household. And at the end of the fishing season, they would be obligated to sell to that merchant or exchange with their merchant. And the problem was that the merchant would grade the fish, and there was always carryover debt. So if they fronted you $200, say, for example, for everything you needed for the year, that oftentimes you were told that, well, okay, you had a great catch this year, but it's only worth, say, $120. So we'll carry over the 80 till next year. So you were constantly in debt. So when industry started coming up, and fishermen decided, I want cash money. I want cash money. And it was part of the reason why so many Newfoundlanders risked their lives going to the annual seal hunt, because they got a share of the catch, which was a bit of cash money too. And so you slowly saw the means of the economy changing.
And what did that do? Like you said, it changed the economy. Now these were fishermen, the labor class, I guess at that point they would be. The were there the investment in these industries, were they people from England that came over, or were these merchants that had been established mostly in some of the port areas that then started to invest and build up?
Well, there were some major merchants who I guess who had some sub merchants in the coves and whatnot or in around the bay. Some were independent though. And a lot of these merchants did start off over in England. And so you're talking about your Slades and folks like that. Um, Water Street in St. John's was, and places like Harbour Grace and even some places up in Bonavista, Vista, but they were the places that took the fish overall and traded it. And I'm sure there were pressures for the individual merchant in the coves as well of what they could offer. But yeah, mainly it was British, some Scottish as well, who were here, who were merchants. Again, Water Street in St. John's was just the fishing merchant capital of Newfoundland.
And these the merchants that I guess a lot of it probably would have been selling for obviously foreign markets. They was a lot of that capital reinvested, and would you see that? Would you see these merchants once they started to get established and be in Newfoundland themselves start to obviously starting to reinvest, but did that affect the way, like you said, the population grew in different areas where they built the industry, the fishermen would come out, but was this where they were getting the people, or at this point where they now the immigrants coming specifically to work in industries, would people be finding that in their ancestry when they start to look?
Yeah, I mean, it was primarily, shall we say, English ships, although there were other countries here too, the Dutch, the French, the Portuguese as well were here, the Spanish. But using the example of English ships that were coming over, that they would hire green men or green boys, as they call it, who were just take jobs on ships. They either came from the English or Irish countryside. They would come over here and fish. That's where primarily you would see them. And again, keeping in mind that a lot of them did actually just go back. It took a while for it to really establish here. You had mentioned about reinvesting in the industry, and it did change for a long time. It was a very what we call hook and line cod fishery, a man in the boat just jigging up and down to get his codfish. Some of the seine nets that came in eventually, but it was the push by, I think, Iceland, Greenland themselves, who got into flash freezing, and there was a demand for fresh fish, frozen fish, as opposed to salted fish. That put the pressure on, particularly in the early 1900s, for the Newfoundland industry to start to change.
And did that bring, like I said, a different type of people? Were these businesses now in these communities that are now being established outside of the fishing villages, were they starting to be, like I said, populated by bringing immigrants over to work in these industries, or were they mostly populated by the fishermen who left the fishing to make the dollar?
Yeah, it would mostly be the latter. And
Okay.
then when you had like fish plants that would go into communities as well, is that some would choose to go work into fish plants. Yeah, so it was just an ever-growing change to it, and of folks working in those fish plants, getting the product ready to go to market, as opposed to ships coming, taking it all on board, and then shipping it out. So for sure, fish plants grow with the difference in refrigeration and whatnot. You see the fish plants popping up here and there along the shore.
Okay. But for the lumber plants and the other industry that started to develop again, would it still just be it mostly? I guess I'm trying to say,
Yeah.
would if a person is looking and they can't get past a certain date where they can find their ancestor existing in Newfoundland before then, but they can't find you know, is there a certain period where there was that again that influx of a new population that weren't coming there just for the fishery, I guess.
There were some, I mean, from my experience, it was primarily people moving from the industry, from the fishing industry to those. I mean, there
Okay.
were some folks who would come over and work, say, in another industry that developed was the mining industry.
Yeah.
And so one thing I would encourage people is when you're doing research, especially with some specific industries like that, could be lumber or I always like to use the example of mining, is that if they suddenly disappear from the records in Newfoundland, do check off island records.
Yeah.
And so mining, for example, I mean, we had a few mines here, iron ore mine on Bell Island, Tilt Cove, which was a copper mine, other mines in the province. And as they may have shut down, you saw people, say, for example, who would move to Sydney, Nova Scotia,
Yeah.
and work in the coal mines. And from there, they may go to Pennsylvania in the United States. And so I've had experience where before that's how I managed to find a family, is I followed the occupation.
Yeah. Oh, definitely, because often, I mean, I guess also on the other side of that, coming in Newfoundland, would there be, an influx of Scottish miners that were coming from Scotland that had, did mining that would start working in the mines or?
Some, but not to a great deal.
Okay.
It didn't see that too much here. It seemed to be a lot of locals. Not saying it was
Yeah.
impossible, but when you talk, I mean, a great topic I like to speak to people about is out migration, because as many people came here and lived, a lot of people left.
Yeah.
And the Boston states, as we call it here, had an incredible influx of Newfoundlanders. And there was an estimation I read before that in the 1920s, there were 30,000 Newfoundlanders in Boston,
Yeah.
living in Boston. They not only had their own formal social club, but they had their own newspaper. It was called the Newfoundland Weekly. And all the issues for that are available on a great website here from that's Memorial University of Newfoundland. It has a website called the Digital Archives Initiative, which has not only newspapers, but all kinds of printed material that's searchable. And the Newfoundland Weekly is there. They had a Boston edition, and eventually they had a Brooklyn edition as well. Because ironically, and again, on the topic of out-migration, during World War II, we had Canadian bases, military bases, and American military bases here. And a lot of Newfoundland women married Americans and moved to the U.S. of different parts. And I guess this is where today we see an awful lot of people. I know I can speak from it personally, where the projects I work on, I would estimate that between 90 and 95% of the folks who I had the pleasure of assisting don't live here, have never lived here, but they discover they have Newfoundland roots. And they're spread out worldwide, but a big influx into the United States and other parts of Canada.
I like how you say the Boston states, because that's how my family always referred to them. Because my mom's family from Cape Breton, the same thing. There was a large, I think my grandfather, out of the 12 of them, I think 4 or 5 of them wound up in the Boston states.
Yeah, and what's always amazed me when I track families into the States and look at the census records is that eventually a large portion of them ended up marrying Newfoundlanders down there.
Yeah.
And some of them from their same home community back here. But it was like they did set up their own little communities down there. and they, I'm sure they commute, they had interactions with other parts of the city, but they did, like I said, they had their own formal social clubs.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's like any immigrant population anywhere. You tend
Yeah,
to go where your own are first because
absolutely.
you speak the language, even if it's English, it's a different dialect, um, different phraseology.
Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely do that.
Yeah.
In my experience, that's why you find, very pockets of in any area where you can say, oh, it seems like you're living in this area and your family probably came from this area of Ireland or this area of Scotland because just
Yeah.
about everybody else,
Yeah.
that's where they came
Well,
from.
yeah, and from my own personal experience, my a maternal great uncle left the south coast of Newfoundland, left Harbour Breton when he was about 15 or 16 years old on a fishing schooner, and he ended up staying in Worcester, Massachusetts, where he was married, and he never came back. Never came back. Um, I have a paternal great aunt, two times great aunt, who left Newfoundland in the late 1870s, moved to Boston, married a German immigrant. They ended up in Brooklyn. She never came back. But approximately 5 years ago, I had the pleasure, my wife and I, of going to New York and visit the cemetery in Brooklyn. And I found her headstone and to stand there. And as far as I know, I was the first Morrissey to ever stand at her headstone. She died in 1937. It was an incredible experience. But again, it was just an example of people left, and a lot of times they never came home. So saying goodbye on the coastal ship or whatever, leaving here truly was in a lot of situations goodbye. You'll get letters, but you probably never see them again.
And was in your experience, was it, I guess, did they leave with intention of never coming back, or was there?
Well, I think the expense and the trouble to get
Yeah,
here
yeah,
traveling to and from Newfoundland, even today, I always say sometimes it's a bit of a challenge. It's a challenge, but well worth the effort. But back then, to sail out of Boston and then to make it to back usually it's via Halifax and then back here. Um, I mean, some people did come back and visit, but it would be quite a challenge. It'd be quite a challenge to do that.
and did they? Interesting, the Boston and the areas of my dad's Irish side. We have relatives that lived in Brooklyn, lived in their selfies in Boston because
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
where the Irish were, and
yeah,
they were only two generations or one generation out from Ireland in some cases.
yeah.
So again, not only did they stay with their own that might have been from the most recent past, but they still tended to go where there were those Irish communities as well. Or is that the case? Not only was this sort of a subset of the Irish community in Boston? Was the Newfoundland
I would
Irish?
think so. Yeah, yeah, I would. Yeah, absolutely. And and to encourage people in looking at their Newfoundland ancestors who may have relocated, again, websites like familysearch.org. They One of the things I really enjoy looking at are the border crossing documentation, and some of them are just looks like little cards, and sometimes it'll say, well, where did you last live, and who's your last relative back there. But more important, sometimes of equal importance, is who are you going to go live with?
Yeah.
And it would name somebody in Boston, and a lot of times it would be, a sister or whatnot, which was a great clue because sometimes the sister's name, obviously, if she married, changed.
Yep.
If you're looking for somebody, you've hit two birds with one stone. You found out where that person went, and you found out that their sister is now married and goes by a different name. And maybe that's why I call my business More You See Genealogy, not because there's a bit of a tie-in with my surname, but because like everybody's experience, every piece of information you find, I always say, leads you to at least two more questions
Yeah,
and beyond.
and definitely. That's a really good point. And I love looking at those immigration records. I found my grandfather in 1939 arriving in Brooklyn on a ship. He was coming from Halifax. Everybody else on the list was Chinese except for him, which was I
Yeah,
found very interesting. Just
yeah,
that sub fact, but I never knew why he was down in New York in 1939 until I happened to mention to one of my my um, one of my uncle's wives, so let's see, my aunt, but by marriage, and she said, "Well, I remember hearing that being Irish, our family had that fair skin and a predisposition to melanoma. So,
yeah,
so I guess he was going down in Boston. He was staying with an aunt in Brooklyn to go see a doctor. And I remember my dad saying when he was in the Navy, stopping in Brooklyn and visiting these which would be grandaunts or
yeah. Well, for anybody who has ancestors in the Newfoundland ancestors who went to Brooklyn, for that matter, anybody uh, in the audience who had ancestors going to Brooklyn from wherever, um, the uh, the cemetery I visited was Greenwood Cemetery, not well over 400 acres. It's beautiful cemetery, and more importantly, if you go to their website, they have a great
okay,
database. And so a lot of times it doesn't say where the person came from, but it'll tell you where if a person by that name is buried there and the plot number. So if you go to visit in Brooklyn, um, you can just get a map of the cemetery, which they have very helpful staff there, and they'll bring you there. And that's what happened to me. Although don't make the mistake my wife and I did. We actually walked from Manhattan to Brooklyn.
yeah. So
My feet still throb with the thoughts of that one. So, and good footwear if you're going to do it. So,
definitely.
yeah.
The interesting. I was just thinking now when you were talking about the Newfoundland Weekly.
Mhm.
As much as seeing copies in the archives of the actual paper, which I'm sure gives you some great clues, because did they cover the specifically just Newfoundland for people that were aware that they also cover the local Newfoundland scene, I guess.
Yeah, a little bit of that. What you see in the Newfoundland Weekly is little reports or advertisements from the Newfoundland Social Club, different happenings. Uh, they did regurgitate or copy from Newfoundland newspapers some, birth announcements, marriages, and obituaries. But some of the important stuff in, talking about the social end of things in Boston or Brooklyn, as well as that they would mention that, say, for example, Mr. James Pittman is, and this is the words they would use, is going home for a visit in August to see his family, say, in Placentia Bay. And it was neat to see that too. So well worth looking at it. And again, the Memorial University Digital Archives Initiative, um, collections.mon.ca. They have a large collection of Newfoundland newspapers to begin with.
Uh,
And you can download it, print it, whatever you want with it and stuff. So it's
Now, something that would be I'm sure more valuable almost than the papers itself. Are there any list of the subscribers around?
yeah, great questions. I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I would love to, and I mentioned this to, I've gotten to know David Allen Lambert, who's the chief genealogist with American Ancestors in Boston. They used to be the New England Historical and Genealogical Society. I mentioned I had the opportunity to meet David back in July when we hosted a genealogy conference here in St. John's. About I would love to at some point pick his brain about the Newfoundland Social Club particularly.
Yeah,
And see is there anything down there in terms of memberships.
yeah.
So that's on the to-do list, Brian.
Yeah, because I would definitely, I would almost think, like I said, that would be as valuable as any of the information in the articles
Oh,
that
yeah.
you might see. They give you
Yeah.
But
Well, I tell you what, something that's amazing too, and again, I mentioned earlier that I work part-time at the archives at the Rooms Provincial Archives. Um, I, I, uh, I looked at a collection um, last year, which I helped digitize or put in a spreadsheet at the archives. A gentleman, forgive me, I can't remember the name of the collection offhand, but people would like to reach out to me. I'll find out for them. But a gentleman in the early 80s, up to about 1990, was sending to the archives clippings from Boston and New England newspapers, obituaries of Newfoundlanders former Newfoundlanders who died there. And it's an incredible collection. And so I want to do further work on it to find out who was this gentleman and why did he do it. I like to think he must have had Newfoundland roots himself, but there's a collection of the actual clippings of saying, Mrs. Jane Doe of Pooch Cove, Newfoundland, whose parents were blah, 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 passed away at the age of 82 in whatever. And it's just a fascinating thing. And it just taught me, well, a continued lesson that you just don't know what's out there and you just need to ask.
yeah. So getting back to, I guess, you sort of brought us back to sort of the important part is the resources that are available at the rooms. Your information, some of it's digitized. Is there a lot of indexes that are at least searchable so that if it is an actual record, you mentioned a lot of them you have to go there, but is there a good indexing that is done?
Yeah, if you go on the Room's website and go under collections and research, there is a searchable database there to look at a lot of the other fonds as well. And not all of it is obviously digitized, but at least you can go through your index and plan your trip if you're going to come here and do research. Similarly, Memorial University of Newfoundland have some resources as well. There's the Center for Newfoundland Studies that they have searchable database. There's the Maritime History Archive, which is everything Maritimes. One of the common questions I get is, are there passenger lists and crew lists? There are, but they're for the very late 1800s. Yeah. It used to be held in England. And I believe the UK archives there a number of years back, I guess through spacing, was going to get rid of a lot of the records. And fortunately, some representatives of the Maritime History Archive managed to retrieve some of them, which is quite interesting. Also at Memorial University, there's the Archives and Special Collections, which is just a treasure trove of collections of information. Some of it is you can search it on database. Some of it you have to make an appointment to go see. So for anybody, for example, who would like to do research on our infamous long-term premier, Joseph R. Smallwood, his entire collection is at the Archives and Special Collections, including his bow tie and his baby shoes and other things and other pieces of paper and whatnot. So, but yeah, and I'm just scratching the surface on some of the things that are available. Newfoundland Labrador Public Libraries as well have a genealogical research collection, which is quite good.
And that's accessible to anybody?
It is, yeah, it is. Okay. And again, the challenge for most of these places is digitization.
Yeah.
But nearly all of them are very approachable in terms of dropping them a line, or if you see something, or how can I arrange to see that, or can you make a copy for me, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, well, just as we wrap up, there's one thing I like to ask people, and that is, as a genealogist, we are so much often we think and we look at things like, boy, I wish that census taker would have just printed a little neater, or spelled correctly. or just I wish they would have had this detail or whatever
Yeah.
on a particular person. What are the things that you as a person are doing to maintain, I guess, your place in the grand history of the world, to make it easier for the researchers that come behind you? What's something you do, or something that you think of that would that people should do that will help their future generations? Because a lot of, I often say that census taker wasn't thinking that we'd be looking at their census 60 years later, so they didn't really care. They were doing it to get it
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. The common complaint you hear from people who do their family tree is, gosh, I wish I had have asked questions earlier. And I reflect on that sometimes, and I think, well, when most of us were younger, we were most interested in the here and now and the future. We weren't, but as we get older, we start thinking about it. So soon as that inkling hits us, you start asking questions of your family members and start trying to collect stuff, collect stories, collect details, et cetera, et cetera. I would encourage folks as well, like I know at the Rooms Provincial Archives, that each month there's an introduction to genealogy course. That's really important to give you a little bit of a taste of what it's involved in doing research. I love guiding people in their research as well. When I have the pleasure of being of working with people on their ancestry, you can never really do a full family history. I mean, it just never ends. So I always consider it that my final product report is a baton that I pass to you to now take the information and try to build on it a bit more. But, some general things as well is that it's a journey. Enjoy the journey. There's not a real big finish line here. Realize too that, you're going to look through a lot of records where you're not going to find anything. However, that's an accomplishment as well, because you can say, well, I know the person I'm looking for is not in this set of records. But boy, when you find that record you need, you forget about all that other stuff. Try to plan your research as well. If you go into an archives looking for 10 people, you would be lucky if you find one. So come in and pick your target to say, I'm going to look for this one person today, or two people, and be patient with yourself and ask questions to people at the various archival resources places, and even our volunteers at the Family History Society of Newfoundland and Labrador. They're here to help. And I always say, in my time when I'm working part-time at the archives, my job is not only there to take your request slip and go into the vault and grab your box of files. It's to pick my brain and ask me, I've done this, where would you go next? And although we won't do your research for you, so to speak, but we can just give you some sort of guidance as well. So.
And I like what you said there, because often, genealogy, if you don't start with a specific goal, you can find yourself way off track, or you try to swallow too much and you wind up choking, basically.
Yeah. And if I can just add one other thing too, is just a habit of mine. So, to augment my background, I did the 40 course program through what's now called the International Institute for Genealogical Studies. And the thing about that institute, I can only speak to that one because I'm not familiar with other ones, is that you don't have to sign up for a 40 course program and get your certification. You can pick certain topics as well. And so if there is a certain area you're wondering about, go in on the website for a place like that, or any other place that offers training, and do a course. And sometimes it's even the introduction to genealogy, just to learn some research methods and whatnot. But one habit I have, which helps incredibly, is when I start working on a project, I will usually start doing, research wherever, online and the archives, Family History Society, Memorial University, the Newfoundland Labrador Public Libraries. And after a couple of weeks, I have in my office a separate little desk with Bristol board. And I start physically drawing a chart. And for me, that physically doing it with, and I always say I write it in pencil until I can write it in ink to confirm what I'm doing. But a lot of times when you're physically drawing what the results you are, not only are you organizing your thoughts and you just don't have a jumble of notes and journals and stuff floating around, but it helps you see where maybe some errors you're about to make or some contradictions in the information. So then as you go along doing your research, I come back here and I'm just adding to the chart. And sometimes I know for me, I just need a visual. I need a visual. Some of the mistakes I've seen in family trees, particularly online sometimes, is that nobody is doing anything to purposely mislead folks. But sometimes it's simple things. It's just simple things like, okay, I've noted that they passed away in 1892. However, I'm looking at a marriage record about somebody by that name in 1903. And sometimes you actually see that in people's family trees. They'll continue doing it. But when you physically have to draw it, that you see that and you go, well, it can't be the same person. Right? Could be related, but not the same person. So, but yeah, and if anything else, enjoys.
Yeah.
Enjoy this. It's just a wonderful, wonderful field to get involved in. And when you do your family tree and you discover about your ancestors, it will change you. It will change you because you get a better understanding of who you are.
Exactly. And one very final question.
Sure.
What would be the holy grail of Newfoundland genealogy? Basically, the thing that is missing, that if somebody had this record, like, either because it was lost with either with fire or just, there's probably this record out there, but it just doesn't, it hasn't been found yet.
Can I say two?
Yeah.
Okay. So number one is the 1911 Newfoundland census. There's only small parts that are there. The rest of it it's gone missing. It's missing, and it's a huge important part. Again, we only joined Newfoundland Canada in 1949. So when the Canadian census for 19
year before?
Yeah, or year before, was it 1930 or 31?
31.
Canadian census. We're so lucky in Newfoundland. We have the 1935 census and 1945 census. Those are all available online. So we're a little bit ahead of the ballgame. The 1911 is just little bits and pieces that are on them. But the second piece that I would love, I wish we could have it, is the Roman Catholic records for Harbour Grace from 1845 to 1866 was destroyed in a fire. And it is a huge loss because Harbour Grace was such an important community in Newfoundland history. It could have rivaled St. John's as the capital at that time. And you had that 20-year period that's missing. And gosh, it would be so good. I mean, when I'm approached by people who say, I'd like for you to look into some records in this Harbour Grace, there's almost a chant in my head going, please don't say Catholic. I mean, you try to be creative and work around it, looking at the Harbour Grace Standard newspaper and whatnot. But those would be the two. I mean, there's many others as well, but those would be the two.
Yeah. Well, the Harbour Grace one, I feel for you. It definitely.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's been very good. I really enjoyed talking to you.
it's been a pleasure.
How can my viewers, if they and listeners, if they want to find out more, how can they find you?
Well, I have a website, www.moreucgenealogy.com, or reach out to me at moreucgenealogy@gmail.com.
Okay, great. Well, I'll put those up definitely in my descriptions. Well, thank you very much, Craig. I really
Fine.
appreciate it,
That was
taking the
it.
time to talk to me today.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of another episode of the How We Got Here podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Brian loves hearing from you, so please feel free to leave a comment below. If you have a burning genealogy question or a fantastic idea for a future episode, send an email to podcast@howwegothere.ca. And don't forget to check out our new genealogy community at https://familycircle.howwegothere.ca.